Get your pro punching bag by following the link in the description. Zab Judah versus Hector Camacho Jr. Going out to Trade Titan. Let's get into it. This is a fight that I thought would take place at the time that both of these guys were on top, and it was one that I was hoping would take place, given that they both had similar styles. Both of these guys were slick, speedy southpaws, great counterpunchers, and pretty styles. Both of them fought in the early 2000s, which was a great era that I feel is often forgotten about or overlooked. They both were talented underachievers who could have been so much greater than they were. They both had great attributes that a fighter could ask for as far as footwork, hand speed, movement, upper body movement, but just didn't know what to do with all of that talent. One thing we can say about Zab Judah is that he fought every great fighter of his era, win, lose, or draw. He's had a far better career than Hector Camacho Jr., bouncing back from every loss or setback to continually get more opportunities. Even in most of the fights that he lost, he's given a great showing. He was the first one to knock down Floyd Mayweather, in my opinion, and he gave Floyd one of the toughest tests of his career. Unfortunately, Zab lost a lot of fights he should have won, in my opinion, but it happens and it is what it is. In the case of Hector Camacho Jr., of course, we all know that he was the son of a famous fighter. Speaking of Hector Camacho Sr., and so often there's a lot of pressure on the children of famous fighters to live up to their parents' name and to fill those shoes. Hector Camacho Jr. was off to a brilliant start, but eventually ran into challenges that he just couldn't overcome, and his career just never rebounded from. Once again, these things happen. It's life and it's boxing. Hector Camacho Jr. did have a beautiful, entertaining, flashy style that I wanted to see more of, especially against Zab Super Judah. Stylistically, this fight could have been everything that fans wanted. Of course, they had a common opponent in Omar Weiss. Omar Weiss beat Hector Camacho, and Zab Judah dominated Omar Weiss. But if you've seen enough of my videos, I don't believe in triangle theories. I really wish we could turn back the hands of time and see Judah versus Camacho Jr. So let's get down to business to determine the winner of this fight. I can't tell you enough how similar these guys are, but at the time that both of these guys were on top and they were most likely to fight, Zab seemed to be the more seasoned and experienced of the two. The attributes I'm about to mention, they both had in common. But it seemed that Zab had the better footwork, the faster hands, the better reflexes, and that he was the better counterpuncher between the two. I also think that Zab had more power and more pop to his shots. As far as Camacho is concerned, I feel that he was more steady on his feet with his wide stance. He was tougher and had the better chin than Judah. Camacho Jr. definitely had the better jab. I think this fight comes down to who would be better down the stretch. Who would be more focused and committed to the game plan. I'm seeing good back and forth action into the later rounds until one of them fades. But you may ask yourself which one of them will fade down the stretch. And if we look at the resume and experience of both fighters, Zab has the better resume and more experience at this point in both of their careers. I see good back and forth action till around, let's say, the 9th round, when Zab Judah catches Camacho Jr. with either a lead left uppercut or a lead straight left, followed by flurries. So I'm going with Zab Super Judah by 9th round stoppage. Let me know what you think, and I will see you on the next video. I'm a little rematch weary. Joshua versus Usyk. Haney versus Kambosos. Now, back in the day, we got rematches when the fights were actually rematch worthy, when the fights were competitive, when there was back and forth action, when there were unanswered questions. That's when we got rematches. That's when we got trilogies, when the fights were entertaining. But nowadays, it just seems like every fight is going to produce a rematch. No matter how entertaining the fight was, and no matter how competitive the fight was, even if every question was answered, we're going to get a rematch, because rematches is just what we do. Well, I'm here to tell you that there's a lot of rematches that are unnecessary. Haney versus Kambosos, totally unnecessary. Joshua versus Usyk, totally unnecessary. Now, Canelo versus Triple G might be a different story, although I think a third Canelo versus Triple G fight is totally unnecessary. Both fights were very close, so there may be unanswered questions there, although I don't want to see it. I see why it's taking place, but it's pointless at this time. And sometimes a rematch isn't always beneficial for the loser, or the winner for that matter. And sometimes you can lose a fight and you just have to learn the lesson. You just have to move on. You just have to take it as a loss, and you just have to seek better opportunities. But the problem with unnecessary rematches is they hold up better fights that can be taking place. I really wanted to see Usyk versus Fury at some point. But of course that can't take place because we're stuck with Joshua versus Usyk. And no disrespect to Joshua, but Usyk dominated that fight. Usyk was totally dominant, and I really don't see what would be different in the rematch. Now, as I always say, this is boxing and anything could happen, but what adjustments could Joshua possibly make to win this fight? Sometimes it is what it is. And sometimes the other guy just has your number, and you just need to leave it alone. Now, of course, I don't want to deny any fighter his chance at revenge or redemption. And that's appropriate when the fight was actually competitive. For example, Ronald Winky Wright versus Jermaine Bad Intentions Taylor. That was rematch worthy. We never got the rematch, but that was rematch worthy. Amir King Khan versus Marcos Maidana. That was rematch worthy because those fights were close, those fights were competitive, and those fights produced unanswered questions. But rematches, just for the sake of rematches, I think we need to rethink this. And a lot of times the fans aren't asking for these rematches. So my heart goes out to the fighters who lost those fights. But sometimes you would be better served seeking other opportunities. For example, John Ruiz never got a rematch against David Tua, but John Ruiz went on to be a champion and a great legend. The same with Vladimir Klitschko. He never got a rematch against Corey Sanders, but he went on to be a champion and a great legend. So a revenge rematch isn't always necessary, or rematching just to rematch, or rematching just to prove a point. It's not always the best way to go. And sometimes, believe it or not, losses can be a blessing in disguise. So every fight doesn't need a rematch. The rematches can hold up better fights. It can stand in the way of better opportunities. So I just wish they would consider not making some of these rematches, just moving on after a loss, learning from that loss, and becoming better after that loss. Once again, every fight doesn't need a rematch. Please let me know what you think on this subject, and I will see you on the next video.